It's time for the Phil Ferguson Show. This is Phil Ferguson, and you are listening to The Phil Ferguson Show. A little later in the show, we have an interview with Andrew Seidel. His brand new book just came out. I'm going to put this episode out right after his book comes out, so go and order it, buy it at a bookstore, whatever you've got to do. And it is called The Founding Myth. It's all about the Founding Fathers and how they did not create a Christian nation. So if you've heard that shit, you're going to want to get this book. Also, for the Investing Skeptically segments coming up, we're going to have Super Shitty Fund. Again, a new Super Shitty Fund. You're going to love this one. This is great. And then we're also going to talk about Woodbridge Group, which is a construction peer-to-peer lending kind of thing where a whole bunch of money has disappeared. I don't want to spoil that, so hang on for that. And real quick here in my introductory section, I want to talk about a little notice I got from Vanguard because I have money in the Vanguard Growth Index Fund, which is one of the funds that I use. I figured I would read it to you and go over it for a minute. And this is a new category they've added to principal risks of this fund, non-diversification risk. Due to recent index rebalancing and in order to closely track the composite of the fund's target index, more than 25% of the fund's total assets are invested in issuers representing more than 5% of the fund's total assets. Okay, so real quick, what that means is they are very heavily concentrated in a handful of funds. Matter of fact, this fund, the 10 largest holdings, the 10 largest stocks, are about 37% of its assets as of March 31st, 2019. And this is from the Vanguard website. And I'm talking about the fund. Where's the symbol here? This is VIGRX, the Vanguard Growth Index Fund. And they sent me this sheet to just kind of give a full disclosure that there's an additional risk. And it's one that we've talked about. It's not a big, severe, scary risk, but it's something for you to think about if you have too much of your money in large cap growth funds. And there's a lot of them out there because that's what has been the winner for several years now. Matter of fact, the last 5 years, large cap has beat mid cap and small cap. And of course, growth has been the best performer of the large caps. So a lot of funds are tracking those stocks, and you can get overweighted. You might think you have 4 or 5 different diversified funds, but you find out later that they all invest in the same thing. So this fund, for example, its top stocks are Microsoft, Apple, Amazon, Alphabet, Facebook. Right? No big surprise. Those 5 stocks are very big. And if 1 or 2 of them have some serious problem, you could see a bigger impact to your portfolio than you would like to. So you're not quite as diversified as you might think that you are. I'm going to go on with this little non-diversification risk notice and quote, as a result, the fund is non-diversified under the Investment Advisor Act of 1940, although it continues to hold more than 300 stocks across a number of sectors. The fund's performance may be hurt disproportionately by the poor performance of a relatively few stocks or even a single stock. So it's just something that you should be aware of. It doesn't mean don't use this fund, because I still use it. I'm going to keep using it. But just don't get overweighted in it. If someone is in retirement and let's say they have 30% of their money in the cushion, 40% of their money in the cushion, and 25% of the stocks in international, by the time you get down to what is in the U.S. market, I mean, you could be talking about half or 45% of the money in the U.S. market. And if the large cap growth is 30, 28, I'd even be comfortable with 26% of your U.S. portion. I mean, we're talking about a quarter, maybe a little bit more than a quarter of the half of your money, so 12%. So again, these 4 or 5 stocks, none of them are beating the 5% rule that I like to follow, but the handful of them are getting kind of to be a big portion of this fund. And if you have all of your money in stocks and you only have 3 or 4 funds and they're all large cap growth funds, you could have a serious dip in your fund, or even a serious increase if one or more of these stocks perform really bad or really well. So it increases your volatility. Just something to let you know about. We'll take our quick break, of course, and we'll go into the investing skeptically topics, more investing skeptically topics. And then after that, the founding myth with Andrew Seidel.
And what's meant to happen when you die and go to heaven? You see a big bright light. You walk towards the light. What's at the end of the light? All your dead relatives. Well, whoop-de-fucking-do. You ever spent a weekend at your grandparents' house? It's fucking shit. You'd be out there for an hour going, wish all me friends would die. Be out there meeting everyone. Hello, Nana. Hello, Grandad. Hello, Uncle who used to touch me. How did you get up here? Oh, that's right, you used to work for the church. You hear that little groan when I said that? When I said you have to work for the church? It's because religious people are in the crowd and they don't like hearing facts. That's a fact. There's been pedophiles in the Catholic Church. It's been on 60 Minutes. Fucking fact. But I say, and it's like, oh, no, because religious people will forgive God for fucking anything. If he, in their mind, he does good things. Rainbows, children's laughter, shit like that, right? But when he does bad things like hurricanes, AIDS, cancer, child molestation, then we just go, oh, well, God works in mysterious ways. What type of an excuse is that? What is mysterious about acting like a fucking asshole? That is like the least mysterious activity since the dawn of time. If I ever date a religious girl, she's going to come home and I'm going to be raping her mum, right? And she's going to look at me and go, what are you doing? And I'm going to go, I'm mysterious. I've always been mysterious.
Today's Investing Skeptically segment is a super shitty fund. It's not something I even actually go out and look for. They come to me, and in this case, someone sent me one of their portfolios that a different advisor had put them in a handful of different things. And this is one of the things that the advisor apparently thought was a good idea. So I'm going to talk about it here a little bit. And if you want to look it up on Morningstar.com, you can look it up, play along, because that's part of Investing Skeptically, is that I share with you the way that I found out the information on this. The symbol for this is HFRO, Henry Frank Robert Orwell. I guess that goes with this fund. It's the Highland Floating Rate Opportunity Fund. I'm sorry, Opportunities Fund. Just like I don't like organizations that often use the word family because it means it's a scary Christian dystopian organization like the Family Research Council. I also don't like when they use the word opportunities, because if they have to tell me it's an opportunity, maybe they're trying to compensate for something. So that's one thing. Also, longer names scare me. It's like Variable Universal Life. When they start getting complicated names, I feel like they're trying to hide something. Another thing that I generally don't like are floating rate funds. It's a type of bond fund that instead of buying bonds that pay fixed interest, they buy bonds and or loans that pay variable interest. And often these can have secret risks and leverage things that you didn't know about or didn't understand. But they can pay a higher yield, and they can benefit when rates go up. And so it's something I've seen more often lately, that while interest rates are believed to be going up, my strategy is to avoid risk by not having intermediate and long-term bonds, and maybe take a little bit of risk by having some junk bonds or emerging market bonds. Take the risk somewhere else. A floating rate fund is really not sensitive to the duration risk problem. So that is the big sales point, that if long-term interest rates go up, this fund will not go down. Matter of fact, the loans and the bonds that they have outstanding will just start paying more and more money as rates go up. So rates now suddenly become a good thing for you. So a floating rate fund is not in and of itself bad, but it's often becomes a marketing gimmick, which then gets wrapped up in shitty stuff inside if you don't know exactly what you're buying. So just getting a floating rate fund may sound like a clever thing to do, but may end up not being a clever thing to do. This fund also has, for the bonds, a BB rating. So stocks go AAA. Well, it's AAA, AA, single A, triple B, double B, single B. And so this is just flirting with and maybe it's slightly below the junk bond cutoff. Now, it's kind of an arbitrary thing, but keep in mind, these are not high quality bonds. So you're taking some risk there. So you have interest rate fluctuation risk and you have quality risk because some of these are junk bonds. And the other thing that is very interesting to see is that this also, even though it's called Floating Rate Opportunities Fund, it doesn't say it's a bond fund, but it was sold to this investor as a bond fund. Well, it turns out that it has 45% of its money in the U.S. stock market and 19% of its money in other, which means it's not stocks and it's not bonds. It doesn't break down the detail of other in this Morningstar report, so that's a little concerning. 19% of other. What the fuck is other? Other often, in this case, because of the type of fund that it is probably individual bonds or loans that bought a loan. And I can kind of know that because this fund currently, as of 12/31 of 2018, last disclosure that Morningstar has access to, its top 5 holdings are 68% of the portfolio. 68%. So you basically bought a handful of bonds and or loans, which if you wanted those instruments, you could have gone and bought them. The purpose of a mutual fund is to have broad diversification. Matter of fact, the single largest thing in this fund is 38% of the portfolio. So one individual investment thingy is 38% of the portfolio. It's not a diversified portfolio. So we're just racking up the problems. It's junk bonds. It's floating rate. It uses the word opportunities. Oh, and by the way, it's a closed end fund. So it is bought on the market for a price. And when you want to sell it, you don't get the net asset value like you do for a normal mutual fund. You get whatever it's trading for. And currently it's trading below market value because it's not worth what you think it's worth, or it's not worth what you paid for it, I guess, is the important thing, what it was sold to you if you bought it a couple of years ago. Another thing that's a problem is that it's also negative cash. So it's shorting cash, which means they're borrowing cash. So they have to borrow cash to invest in the things, and you're paying for that borrowing of cash. And let's see, what else do they have here that was weird? There were so many things. I lost track of all the craziness. For 2018, what did this fund do? Ah, yes, here it is. For 2018, it lost 12%. So if you thought a floating rate bond fund with opportunities was going to be a good investment, surprise. And this is a new fund. It only started in late 2017, so there's not even a full year of data there. But in 2018, calendar year 2018, it lost 12%. Now, if you understood that this was a highly volatile thing that you're investing in, cool, I guess. But if you bought a bond fund, especially a floating rate bond fund, it was probably sold to you as a way to avoid the risk of the pending increase in interest rates and you were going to do okay. And you didn't do okay. You lost 12% because this is loaded full of crap. I can also point out that because this is very thinly traded, and what that means is it doesn't have a lot of activity. It's not a big fund as far as funds go. It doesn't have a lot of activity, that the very fact that you want to get out of it could potentially hurt the price that you're going to get for it, because you have to find a greater fool. You have to find a sucker to buy this from you. So this fund is, I don't know that it's intentionally designed to suck, but I don't see how it can succeed. And one last concern that I have with this fund is it has a distribution rate of 6.76%. And I want to make sure that we're very clear here. This is not a dividend rate. This is a distribution rate. And so what a distribution rate means is that every year the fund gives you back 6.76% as, I don't know, money. I guess it looks like a dividend to you. So as an example, you buy $100,000 and at the end of the year, they give you $6,760 back. And you might think, wow, I made all that money. But what you may not notice is that the fund just went down by $6,760. They paid you back part of your very own money. If that's what you want, again, it's not inherently a problem. But if you thought that was the dividend, if that's what you thought you made, you didn't make that. Like I said, this fund lost a lot of money. And then it gives you some of your money back, which, thank God, you got some of your money out of it already. Of course, if you have it set to reinvest, it just goes right back in. And I don't have any knowledge on this fund at this time if this pays a commission to the broker or the advisor that sold it to you. I wouldn't be surprised. I guess anything's possible. But the 6.76% that it pays out to you, it is simply paying your money back to you. So it's not a dividend. It lost a lot of money. So many things wrong with this, which is why it is a super shitty fund.
A lot of people come up here and they thank Jesus for this award. I want you to know that no one had less to do with this award than Jesus. He didn't help me a bit. If it was up to him, Caesar Milan would be up here with that damn dog. So all I can say is, suck it, Jesus. This award is my God now.
Today I've got a Investing Skeptically segment about a scam. So this is kind of fun. I got a tip of the hat to Mike. I'm going to not use his last name because I don't know that I have permission to use it, but he sent me on this chase with a local article from a paper that he read, and then I did some more research, but it's quite fun. It is something related to a topic we've discussed recently, and this had to do with private mortgage financing or loans against construction of properties. I've talked about these in the past, and it's one of those things where they come to you and it's kind of like I don't know what to call it, private mortgage lending or peer-to-peer lending or mortgage investing. There's all kinds of different ways to do this, and this is one of the reasons why I like to stick to stocks and bonds, because A, they're what I know. There's a system in place to make sure that this is safe and protected, but here is something that was pitched to a lot of people. Apparently 8,400 people since 2012 have been swept up in this thing, perpetrated allegedly by a place called the Woodbridge Group. Woodbridge, a bridge made of wood. Woodbridge Group. And they would sell you notes to construct luxury properties and promise you sometimes quite reasonable 5% returns, but sometimes 10 or 12% returns, and you would get all your money back in 12 to 18 months. And a lot of people in the early years would actually get their money. And this may have actually started as a legitimate exercise where a builder was able to raise millions and millions of dollars to build homes, and then he would sell those homes and just pay off the notes. I don't know all those details. I don't know the intent. And of course, the SEC is involved with this alleged Ponzi scheme, but they would pick up this money, and a lot of times they pay people back. But at some point, either through a failed business model or alleged embezzling, they were not able to pay back all of the money. And so at some point, they failed to not only pay the interest back, but then they found out that he couldn't pay the principal back. And to get other protections under the law, they filed bankruptcy. And so now the SEC is involved, and the SEC was investigating them before the bankruptcy. And of course, now they're investing them even more. And the phrase Ponzi scheme has been thrown out, and it is about a $1.2 billion problem. And one of the things that makes this worse is a lot of people were selling these notes or these promises or these investments. I'm going to use all those words loosely, weren't registered in any way to sell such a thing. So these were advisors that maybe were advising on other issues, tax advisors, insurance advisors, and sometimes even actual financial advisors, people who are registered and legitimately could make such an offer, were offering these products without really knowing what they were offering, because someone had contacted them and said, hey, this is a pretty safe and easy way for your clients to avoid stock market risk, which could be true, to make a reasonable return over the next 6, 12 to 18 months, and they can make 5 or 8%. Now, if you've listened to the show regularly, you know that currently any interest rate that's paying more than 5% per year should concern you. Doesn't mean that it won't. Doesn't mean that it's wrong or that it's inherently bad or evil. But if really safe investments are paying 3 and moderately risky are paying 4 and 5, why is someone paying you 8? Is it really going to make 8? And if I could make 8% on my money and know there was no risk in it, I would probably do it with my own money, not yours, because I want to keep the 8%. Just like when they come to me with these real estate deals and say, you can help build this 4-unit apartment building and then get your money back. Well, if it's such a great deal and you can promise me a 10% return, why won't any bank lend you the money? Because if you could borrow the money from a bank at 5%, why would you borrow it from me and pay me 10%? Because I wouldn't pay 10% interest if I could get away with paying 5% interest. So those kinds of the things that concern me right off the bat, and of course, I think should concern you. And of course, another one of the questions is, who holds the money? And in this case, the Woodbridge group was holding the money. And when they filed bankruptcy, your money's tied up. It's locked. And you've got to wait for the bankruptcy settlement, which could take a long time. I don't know, months, years, to see what portion of your money comes back. And of course, the SEC has fined the Woodbridge group and affiliated members and salespeople a total of about $1 billion in fines and penalties. Well, does that come out first, or does your money come out first? And allegedly, the guy who organized this thing may have misappropriated, allegedly, something like $60 or $70 million out of it. So that money's probably gone. Now, I think one of the SEC orders was that he has to pay that money back, but maybe he doesn't have it. Maybe he spent a lot of it. Apparently he has a nice house, a whole bunch of nice cars. Those can be sold and liquidated over time. So I think the investors will get a portion of their money back, but they're not going to get all of their money back. And of course, if they invested a couple of years ago and it still takes a couple more years to get your money back, if you get 60% of your money back, I would be very excited for you. Very, very excited for you. But you also missed 4 or 5 years to make returns in some really conservative bonds, maybe 2 or 3%, or the stock market maybe theoretically on a long-term average of 10%. So it's not just the money you lost, it's the opportunity cost of not making any money on that money while it was tied up. And of course, while you were in a near panic waiting to see if you were ever going to get the money. And of course, you may have had to hire an attorney and you have other expenses. So it's just not pretty all the way around. So the basic thing for me is when investment sounds really good, I got to wonder, how was this happening? How does it get to me? Who the fuck am I? I'm just some schmo, and someone wants to pay me 10% to borrow my money. How did they get to me? And this is funny because a lot of this stuff started when they would do free seminars. A few weeks ago, my wife and I did a segment on going to a seminar that seemed totally okay. That's cool. But, you go to a seminar, and they give you a dinner, they treat you nice, they talk in the words that you expect to hear, and then you meet with them, and they give you a basket of investment ideas, and one of them happens to be this weird real estate thing. And what do you know, right? That's why you have an expert, because you're not an expert. That's why you hire someone who's an expert. So you say, sure, we'll take a chance on this one thing. It's only $50,000 out of my $500,000 portfolio, and then it goes poof. So you should understand what you're investing in. You should know what you're investing in. You should ask questions. And I think your investment should be held by a qualified custodian. And it's a specific legal term, and it means somebody like Fidelity or Vanguard. Your half-step brother cousin Louis can be a custodian, but he's not a qualified custodian. So he can hold money for you, but he's not following regulations like Schwab, T. Rowe Price, Ameritrade, all these other places that you can use. So you want a qualified custodian, and then you also get extra insurance protections if it's in one of their accounts, a brokerage account or an IRA account. And then you also get additional layer of protection if it's in a mutual fund or an index fund, because if Vanguard, for example, goes broke, if they file for bankruptcy, that affects the money and people who lent money to Vanguard. It doesn't necessarily affect your investments because they're in a different account. Now, it may take a while for you to get your money back also, but you're going to get your money back because you own things, stocks and bonds. Anyway, just a little bit of information about a allegedly Ponzi scheme that had to do with real estate and very good return rates on helping build very, very fancy houses. It didn't work out. Maybe it was just, it spun out of control. Maybe it was planned to be a Ponzi scheme. But $1.2 billion, now up to $1.2 billion, may have disappeared magically. And that was from the Woodbridge Group.
I like how you call homosexuality an abomination.
I don't say homosexuality is an abomination, Mr. President. The Bible does.
Yes, it does. Leviticus
18:22.
Chapter and verse. I wanted to ask you a couple of questions while I had you here. I'm interested in selling my youngest daughter into slavery, as sanctioned in Exodus 21:7. She's a Georgetown sophomore, speaks fluent Italian, always cleared the table when it was her turn. What would a good price for her be? While thinking about that, can I ask another? My chief of staff, Leo McGarry, insists on working on the Sabbath. Exodus 35:2 clearly says he should be put to death. Am I morally obligated to kill him myself, or is it okay to call the police? Here's one that's really important, because we've got a lot of sports fans in this town. Touching the skin of a dead pig makes one unclean, Leviticus 11:7. If they promise to wear gloves, can the Washington Redskins still play football? Can Notre Dame? Can West Point? Does the whole town really have to be together to stone my brother John for planting different crops side by side? Can I burn my mother in a small family gathering for wearing garments made from two different threads? Think about those questions, would you? One last thing. While you may be mistaking this for your monthly meeting of the ignorant tight-ass club, in this building when the president stands, nobody sits.
The Phil Ferguson Show is for educational purposes only. Nothing said on the show should be interpreted as personalized investment advice. Your investment should be based on your situation, and you should consult with your financial advisor before taking any action. The show may contain ads. These ads are placed into the show by the hosting company after I finish recording and editing. I have little control over the content of the ads, and you should not assume that I support their products or claims. If you choose to support the show via the new Patreon page, that support does not create an advisor-client relationship. All right, with me today I have Andrew Seidel. He is a staff attorney at the Freedom from Religion Foundation and has a brand new book. Andrew,
Wait, Phil, I'm not the staff attorney anymore. I'm the director of strategic response now. It's a way more fun title.
Oh, but well, you're an attorney and you're on the staff, so is that
okay?
not,
Fair enough.
Is that
fair
not
enough?
Okay? But you have a fancier title. Tell us that.
I have a fancier title that I invented. It's called the Director of Strategic Response.
I'm not sure that's long enough.
You're right. We could probably add a few words to it.
Yeah, like vice president director or something. And so you work at the FFRF, which is the Freedom from Religion Foundation, and you've been there a few years, man.
I started with FFRF on Halloween of 2011. So yeah, we're chugging right along.
That is fantastic. And what was the name of this book again? I forgot already.
The Founding Myth: Why Christian Nationalism Is Un-American.
Now that sounds like a pretty bold statement, and the book comes out when? Because I'm not 100% sure if this is going to go out before or after. Do you have a preference?
I think any time I think is good. The book comes out May 14th, so people should order it right now. It'll be there in just a few days. I know we're used to Amazon Prime and instant gratification, but this will be close enough. And
just in case this recording goes out a day or two after the 14th, it still comes out on the 14th, so you can go get it and have it shipped right away. Or is there a Kindle version?
There is a Kindle version. There will be an audiobook version as well. I'm not sure on the date of the audiobook version, sadly. As a voracious consumer of audiobooks myself, I am very excited for that.
I love them, and what I tell people is that I pay people to read books to me. And they get this funny look on their face, and I go, well, it's not just me. It's thousands of thousands of people. Are you going to do the audio yourself, or is someone else reading it?
That's one reason it's slightly still up in the air. I've asked to do it because, being a voracious consumer of audiobooks myself, I like it better when it is the author. To me, they know exactly what they were trying to say. It's written in their voice. Yeah. So unless they're a really bad speaker or bad reader, then it usually is slightly better, in my opinion.
Now, what if they could get James Earl Jones? Would you step aside?
I would. There are a few people I would step aside for. I suppose James Earl Jones would be one of them. I actually really want Alan Cumming to read it. The Scotch actor. I think he's awesome, and I listened to a Sherlock Holmes audiobook he did a while back, and I was blown away.
Well, there you go.
But I don't think that's going to happen.
Well, you probably don't have as big a budget as you'd like to do the audiobook.
No, I don't think my publisher does.
Yeah. Well, after it sells its first million, maybe you can redo the audiobook with sound effects and graphics and stuff.
There you go.
Graphics on an audiobook.
And we'll have both Alan Cumming and James Earl Jones. James Earl Jones will read the Bible verses as the voice of God. Yeah.
Yeah. I was waiting for him to say, "Andrew, I am not your God." I don't know. That was terrible. Okay. So this book, Founding Myths, the subtitle again.
Why Christian Nationalism Is Un-American.
It's like you've memorized that.
I've been working on it for a while. It's actually been almost a decade in the making, as you know, Phil. You've been there for a good chunk of it.
I've been harassing you for many a year to finally get this freaking baby out, and it's out. And dear listener, I must confess that Andrew sent me an advance rough draft, not very rough, by the way. It was pretty finished, for me to read, and I thank you for that, for giving me this rare opportunity to read a book before the paroles. So thank you so much. Again, May 14th. Pardon?
It was my pleasure. You deserve it. You really have been supportive from the beginning. So I really do appreciate it.
Do I understand correctly? You're making the rounds and you're going to multiple shows and podcasts to promote this bad boy?
I am. I'm trying to visit everybody. You were, aside from the FFRF TV show Free Thought Matters, you were the first long-form podcast that I'm going to be doing for your loyalty. Sir.
Oh, you're so sweet. You're so sweet. So let's jump into it, because I know your time is limited because you actually have a job to do on top of writing books. I want to start right where you started. I think is a great way to kind of get people into the narrative, the thought process of this book. Talk to me about Judeo-Christianity.
Yeah, Judeo-Christianity is an interesting phrase. The book that I wrote focuses on the idea that we are founded on Judeo-Christian principles. So, right, I think most of your listeners have probably heard the claim that we are a Christian nation. They've probably even read maybe a book about it and are maybe able to refute the idea. But there are kind of two big differences between my book and the other books that are out there on this topic. And the first is that as soon as we debunk that Christian nation myth, it's abandoned. And it's abandoned in favor of this subtler argument that, well, what I really meant was that our nation was founded on Judeo-Christianity or Judeo-Christian principles. And so my book focused on that second myth because it pervades all the other Christian nationalist arguments. If America was not founded on Judeo-Christian principles, it's not a Christian nation, obviously. And so while others have refuted that first idea, Christian nation, nobody's taken the time to rebut the second. So what I do in the book is I actually go and I compare these Judeo-Christian principles to the principles on which the United States was founded. I compare the Bible to the Constitution. I compare the Ten Commandments to the Bill of Rights. And I argue that not only was America not founded on Judeo-Christian principles, but that Judeo-Christian principles, and especially those that are central to Christian nationalism, are opposed to the principles on which the United States was built. And that the systems conflict so much that it's fair to say, albeit bluntly, that Christianity is un-American.
I like it. I like it a lot. Did you have more to that intro? Because I've got another question.
Well, I mean, I did say two differences, and I only got one. I guess.
Talk to me.
Well, I mean, the second one is my approach, really. Previous books they've offered sort of this gentle correction to the Christian nationalists. Here's what history tells us. Here's what the founders actually meant. Here's what the founders said, and they leave it at that. But correction isn't enough, right? Otherwise, we wouldn't have Donald Trump as president, who rode a wave of Christian nationalism into office. So I correct the record, but I also go on the offensive. This book is an assault on the Christian nationalists' identity. Not only are the Christian nationalists wrong, their beliefs and identity run counter to the ideals on which this nation was founded.
I like it. And of course, when I have this draft and I'm going through it, and I'm on page 1. Is that 1? No, that's page I. No, that's page 1. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm barely getting to this book. And I see this glaring error, this giant error. And I'm thinking, oh my God, I've got to call you right away. and you have this image of the 10 Commandments. And I notice right away that there's not 10 of them. There's 9. And there's a number 11. And the 11 comes before 10. And I'm thinking, oh my God, how could you do something so incredibly stupid? And then I read the next page. And so why don't you tease the listeners with this glorious piece of artwork here?
Yeah, so I mean, the book is really about Christian nationalism, and Christian nationalism is this political ideology that says America was founded on Christian principles as a Christian nation, and we need to be restored to that foundation. So it's this, I think I wrote in the book, I think I called it an incestuous marriage of conservative politics and conservative Christianity. And I wanted to illustrate that right at the beginning. And one of the worst Christian nationalists in our nation's history is also unremembered, is this guy named Judge Taylor from Hawkins County, Tennessee. And Judge Taylor wanted to put up one of these displays in the courthouse that he ran that showed the 10 Commandments. It showed George Washington kneeling in the snow at prayer in Valley Forge during that awful winter. It would have "In God We Trust" displayed, "One Nation Under God," and he fundraised to do this. And the image in the book is the commandments plaque that he was going to commission. And on that plaque, he left out one of the commandments. He left out adultery, which turns out to be interesting given Judge Taylor's history. And he mislabeled the 9th commandment as the 11th commandment, which really just does just a perfect job of illustrating one of the major problems with Christian nationalism, and that it is ignorance married to arrogance. And to me, there was no better way to open up the book and illustrate what Christian nationalism is than with Judge James Taylor of Hawkins County, Tennessee.
Well, I just love it. You go to the trouble to make a plaque like that, and you don't even understand how Roman numerals work because he had XI instead of IX. That's great. But you mentioned arrogance mixed with ignorance. And there's only one name that now pops into my head, David Barton. Tell me about him.
So David Barton is sort of one of the godfathers, I guess you might say, of Christian nationalism. He's been promoting the false idea that we are a Christian nation for a long time. He claims to be a historian. He's not. He's not even a pseudo historian, which is what the label he typically receives. I mean, he's a charlatan, and I try in the book not to spend too much time naming Christian nationalists and repeating the things they say. I do it in the first introductory chapter to explain who these people are and explain the argument that they are making. And then the rest of the time is spent really knocking all of that down. I do have in the footnotes, so at the beginning of each chapter, I'll lay out, for instance, this particular argument, and then I have footnote where you can see everybody who's made this argument, all these Christian nationalists. So David Barton shows up there. But really, I didn't want to give these people too much credit or naming, and didn't want to go through every quote, everything they've ever said and every argument they've ever made, because at its most basic, their argument is so fundamentally flawed because Judeo-Christian principles are opposed to the principles on which the nation were founded. And that's the argument that I make in my book. So David Barton's one of the worst perpetrators, but actually does not show up all that often in my book.
No. He's just one of my favorites, and a lot of current day Christians know of him and think he's God's gift to history.
One of the 100 most influential Republicans a while back, and I think in time, So I mean, certainly a big name, and certainly, normally we would call somebody like that a thought leader, but that's not what he's actually doing. So
he's a lie leader. It's an amazing thing. But you mentioned that the Christian values are antithetical to the American values, and that kind of segues into the second part of the book, which you've titled "United States versus the Bible." What could you possibly mean? How can a Christian value, how can a biblical value be opposed to the values that we share as Christian Americans?
Well, and that's exactly what I go over. And each chapter is sort of devoted to one of the central principles in the Bible and compares it to one of the central principles that our nation was founded on. So a chapter that was pretty fun to write was the chapter on hell versus the Eighth Amendment. So the Eighth Amendment to the Constitution prohibits cruel and unusual punishment. Whereas hell, the interesting thing about hell is that it's not really a Judeo-Christian principle the way a lot of these things are. It's actually more, it's really a Christian principle. Judaism doesn't really have a hell. They have an afterlife, a place called Sheol, but it wasn't a place of torture and torment and fire and heat and eternity. Oh, I guess it was eternity, but some of the heroes, quote unquote, literary heroes of the Bible, the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, wanted to go to Sheol. It wasn't a place that you were terrified of going and worried about worms eating your eyes and fire and all that. So hell itself is really a Christian principle, and the founders were really fundamentally opposed to the idea of torturing people. That's basically what the Eighth Amendment stands for. And you have Christianity, which stands for, if you don't do this, you get eternal. If you don't agree with our God and our religion, you get eternal torture and torment.
And of course, it's not just you, but it's your third and fourth generation, all of your offspring,
which is in the Ten Commandments, which most people don't realize. And then you have the founders who said, not only can you worship any God or no God that you want, you have religious freedom, that's guaranteed in the First Amendment, but also we don't believe in punishing people cruelly or unusually, and certainly not to the degree that the Bible does. And this is just one, kind of tiny example. And I really take the time to tease it out, and I go over some of the cases about what cruel and unusual means. For instance, our courts have actually decided that you can't crucify somebody as punishment, that would be cruel and unusual, that locking somebody up with a 5-pack-a-day smoker would be cruel and unusual, which if you think of that as cruel and unusual, and then, the hellfire, the smoke, that would be hell if it existed, you can imagine that also would fall under the definition of cruel and unusual. So that's one example. I also talk about the idea of vicarious redemption
Yeah.
through human sacrifice, and how our system of both justice and government is predicated on personal responsibility, and not just those systems, but I mean our whole financial system is predicated on this, and that it is actually fundamentally opposed to that central Christian principle. And I mean, there are plenty more. I really would encourage people to go read the book to get them all. You get a flavor right now on Amazon. I think you can read the first chapter for free, and you can get a glance at the table of contents and see the other arguments that I'll be making there. But that was a fun section to write. It's funny.
It popped in my head, not related to your book, but financial responsibility is often not the case in white collar crimes. But I'm gonna leave that aside.
But see, they're crimes. I mean, that's
they're crimes, but there's not really a personal responsibility. They just get a slap on the wrist, which is more of a Christian thing, because you can do almost anything and get forgiveness from God, not from the person you hurt, and not from the system, but you just come out and say, God forgave me and everything's cool. That's not an American value per se. That's not in the law. It doesn't say how you get forgiveness from God and everything's going to be okay. There's a whole network set up of courts and rules and regulations for how much time you have to spend in jail and what the penalties are. So it's weird that they keep saying that. And also in the Constitution, it talks about religion, right? So it must be a Christian nation, right?
It does. The Constitution mentions religion a few times. It does not mention Christianity or God. It's not predicated on the power of a deity, which actually made it a revolution in political science. It's predicated on the power of we, the people. It derives all of its power from individual human beings. And when it mentions religion, it does so to exclude religion from our government. It does so in the Article 6, where Section 3, where it prohibits religious tests for public office, meaning that you or I, as atheists, would not be barred from public office, which was, I mean, an amazing thing to be done back in the 1780s, really revolutionary. And then later on, the founders amended the Constitution to include the First Amendment, which says that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. So that guarantees us both a secular government and the free exercise of religion. And really, of those two, the first one is more important, because there is no such thing as the freedom of religion without a government that is free from religion, which is also something I try to explain in the book.
I like it very much. And if my listeners are bothered that we're going too fast, I know your time is limited. And if they want more info, they buy the freaking book, right? It's pretty easy. And we go into the third part, and we're talking about the 10 Commandments. So can you think off the top of your head one thing that's in the 10 Commandments that is not in our Constitution or our laws?
That is not? I mean,
there's one.
Yeah, I mean, there are huge fundamental conflicts between the 10 Commandments and our Constitution. And this section of the book was actually, it was the genesis of the book, if I can borrow that term from the, I started writing this section, and then the book expanded from that section. So it was initially just me comparing the 10 Commandments to the founding principles of our nation, and then the book grew from there. But if you, first of all, you have to establish, well, which 10 Commandments are we talking about here?
I love it. Yeah.
There are 4 sets in any given Bible, and then different religions number them and interpret them differently. Some prohibit icons, some prohibit graven images, some prohibit murder, some prohibit killing. Those are big differences.
Well, now when you say different religions, we're going to say different subsects of Christianity who all think they're all the same until you get into the details, and then nothing's the same.
And Judeo-Christianity, and you talk about Eastern Orthodox. I mean, yes, and there are a few fun charts in the book as well. And I go over those differences. But I mean, really, at their most basic level, the 10 Commandments are a guide to are telling people you have to worship this God, and here are the ways that you do it. You don't worship other gods. You don't make graven images. You take this day off. You respect your elders, your parents, and that way we know who our co-religionists are, because they're going to do these 5 things. And then the other set of rules that we often think of, don't murder, don't steal, don't commit adultery, don't lie, those things really only apply to the people who adhere to the first few rules, to the people who are your co-religionists. But I mean, so at its fundamental, you see that the 10 Commandments begin, I am the Lord your God, you shall have no other gods before me. They prohibit the free exercise of religion, which is, according to the same people who say the 10 Commandments influenced the founding of our nation, is religious freedom is the fundamental value on which our country was founded, according to them. And that's simply not possible. That those two they disagree so much. They are fundamentally opposed. And most people don't even realize this. It's mind blowing.
Yeah, it's a lot of stuff. And of course, I always thought there were 3 sets of commandments, and you pointed out 4. And the 4th one, is a little more stretchy than the other one because it's curses. But it is kind of the same stuff, but it's different.
It is.
And of course, my favorite, you had the whole story in there where Moses goes up, gets the 10 commandments, and he brings them down and finds out they're worshiping an idol, smashes them, so we're never going to find out what they are, although it's written in the Bible. And then he has to go back, but he only goes back after he casts gold across the waters and causes confusion. And what is it, the Lamanites? No, I'm getting Mormonism mixed up in here. They walk around with their swords and kill 3,000 people that they shall not kill. And then Moses goes back up and gets a totally different set of rules, which includes my personal favorite, which you mentioned in the book, just in passing, though, is that thou shalt not seethe a kid in its mother's milk. I love that one.
Yeah, don't boil a kid in its mother's milk it's a dietary restriction. I'm at pains to say that this does not mean a human kid. It's a baby goat, which you could be forgiven for making that mistake given the barbarity of the Bible. But it's a dietary restriction. Tell me how that dietary restriction influenced the founding of America, please.
Yeah.
And the best part about it is that concludes the second set of 10 Commandments in Exodus 34 that is actually called the 10 Commandments in the Bible. The first set in Exodus 20, the set that everybody thinks of, the Charlton Heston gets them from the burning bush set, that one is not called the 10 Commandments.
And isn't it like 42 rules or something?
Yeah, that's in Exodus 20, and really there's no even legitimate theological, literary, biblical rationale for setting the 10 Commandments off. Really, there are 617 rules that show up, the mitzvot that show up in this section of the Bible, and there's no real reason for segregating the 10 off. And the 10 Commandments don't even really mean that phrase is also a little bit wobbly. It probably means the 10 words, not the 10 Commandments. So it's interesting.
Excellent. And another thought that you had mentioned in the book is the right to rebel against the king.
Yeah.
Is that a Christian value of some kind?
Yeah, so this is back in the previous section, Bible versus the U.S. The Bible is pretty clear that the rulers that on earth are ordained by God and they must be followed. You can't rebel against the rulers. It's right there. I mean, it's in Romans 13 explicitly, and I explain this pretty well in the book. And then compare that to how our nation was founded. Read the Declaration of Independence and tell me that humans don't have a right to rebel against a government that is tyrannical. That's what the Declaration of Independence stands for. So that is another absolutely fundamental conflict between Judeo-Christianity and the founding of the American nation. Absolutely.
And of course, after a chapter on virtually each one of the 10 Commandments, we go into verbiage, and one of my favorites is the story of how we get in God we trust on our money. Can you walk us through that?
Yeah, so this is in the final part of the book, which I called Argument by Idiom. And it goes over one nation under God, so help me God, in God we trust, God bless America to end presidential addresses. And the in God we trust is one of the most frustrating examples. This happened during the height of the Civil War. It really, all the important events, getting that added to our money happened in 1863, which, this was one of the bloodiest years in American history, and one of the most eventful years in American history. And essentially what you had was you had this preacher who proposed this as a good time to a couple of government officials, the Secretary of the Treasury and the Director of the Mint, said, now is the time where we could get this on our money. And one of those government officials even called it a propitious time, a lucky time, essentially saying that, look, everybody's kind of not paying attention to this stuff. We can get our God on this money and move it through right now when the nation is busy fighting this war between brothers and between family members. And so they sort of backdoored this. And I think most people in the secular movement or even in the country know that this is not original to the founding. And so that's not the focus of this section of my book. I look at those phrases and I tell the story of how they entered our vernacular. And the thing that is common with each of those is that Christian nationalists use times of national strife and division and fear to impose their religion on everybody through the government. So these were deliberate attempts to force their religion onto the rest of the nation when they knew the nation couldn't fight back and stand by its secular principles. And to me, that is the central argument that we ought to be making. Yes, of course, they don't come from the founding, and having those facts at our back are important. But the thing that I really try to do in this book, and the reason that I want everybody to read it, is that it is not just about the facts. It's about making a better argument against the Christian nationalists. It is ending their political influence because we are going to completely undermine their identity and the myths that underlie them with better arguments, not just the facts, which have not been enough in the past.
And one of the weird things is right now in a lot of states, speaking of times of stress and confusion and anxiety, they're trying to put In God We Trust in more and more schools. And maybe they can even get away with that because the courts have said that this is not a religious saying. Am I understanding that correctly?
You are. I wrote a blog about this for FFRF called The Christian Hypocrisy of In God We Trust. I think that's what it's called. Something along those lines. Google my name, Christian Hypocrisy, In God We Trust. It's something like that. It'll show up. And I explain how the courts have done this. And you're right. They basically said, look, this is not really religious anymore. Through rote repetition, that's one of the phrases, through rote repetition, it's lost all religious meaning, which is complete nonsense. I mean, you can imagine that if a court declared that praying the rosary or reciting John 3:16 or saying the Lord's Prayer had lost through rote repetition all religious significance, you can imagine what the outcry would be from the religious right if a secular court decided something like that, and justifiably so. I would think. I don't think the courts have the power to declare that, but they did it here in an effort not to make a politically unpopular decision, and they abandoned their duty in the process.
Yeah, I think so. And of course, we're getting near the amount of time you promised me, so I'm trying to be respectful. But we can keep talking as long as you have. But one of the things near the end is you talk about the experiment on our liberties and that we should take alarm. Give me some thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I'm quoting James Madison there, who wrote that it is the first duty of all citizens to take alarm at the first experiment on their liberties. And Christian nationalism is not just an experiment on our liberties. It is testing them in a way that they've not been tested certainly in modern times. Now, you and I were chatting a little bit before the show, and I honestly don't care if people buy my book or not. I want people to read it. I want them to read this book because we need to fight back. Again, not just with facts, which you will certainly get from the book, but with powerful arguments that are going to put Christian nationalists where they belong, on the defensive. We need to completely obliterate their political identity. We can't sit silently by while our secular republic is corrupted and stolen. We have to fight. And that's what this book is about.
Of course, everyone should buy the copy of the book and read it. But what is even more important is that after you read it, you share it with a family member, hopefully someone that can read. And I think this is something that should be taught in every high school. We should go over this book and talk about history and the origins of our country because I don't think students are getting that information. They're only getting false information. So this would be a big improvement. So what do you think? Every high school in the nation?
I mean, I would certainly be up for everybody who buys a copy to buy a copy to donate to their local public library, so that others who are less fortunate can get in there and read a copy. I think that'd be a great thing to do. And to me, this is the critical fight of this generation. If we do not defeat Christian nationalism, look, Christian nationalism is why Donald Trump is president. I don't think people really quite grasp this. There are studies backing this up. The number one factor that dictated whether or not somebody was a Donald Trump voter was not their religion. It was not their political party. It was not their socioeconomic status. It was not whether or not they were a racist. It was whether they thought this was a Christian nation and should return to that foundation. Donald Trump is president because the Christian nationalist identity went from being this impotent sideshow to center stage on the center of the political stage. And we have got to do everything we can to end the Christian nationalist myths.
I like it. So once again, everybody, the title, The Founding Myth, Why Christian Nationalism Is Un-American. And the author, of course, is Andrew L. Seidel, Seidel. And you even got a foreword by Susan Jacoby and a preface by Dan Barker, two of my heroes also. And go buy this book. Anything else that you want to cover before you get back to actually doing your job?
I do want to thank Dan Barker and Susan Jacoby briefly. I mean, Susan has written three books, really, actually. Free Thinkers, the Robert Ingersoll biography, and then The Age of American Unreason. She's a phenomenal author and historian and scholar, and she's been so supportive of me throughout this whole process. Just a really wonderful person and mentor, as has Dan, who is upstairs above me right now, the man upstairs.
Yeah.
And, this book would not have been possible without either of their support. I mean, and literally would not have been possible without Susan in a couple different ways, given the advice and support and guidance she offered me. So I owe them a huge debt. I was going to say, as I not quite as big a debt to you for your support, but I do owe you one as well.
Oh, you're very sweet. You can buy me a drink sometime. How's that sound?
Done.
Andrew, thank you so much for being on the Phil Ferguson Show, and I appreciate you spending time with us very, very much.
My pleasure, Phil. Thank you.
You're listening to the Phil Ferguson Show.
Again, thank you to Andrew Seidel for coming and visiting on the Phil Ferguson Show and talking about his awesome book. Go get a copy. You're going to love it. And I think I said in the interview, you really should get a second copy to give to a loved one. It's out just in time for Christmas. It's May. It's almost Christmas. You can give this as a gift. I think we should have virtually every American read this so that they can understand the actual facts of the founding of this country. It was not founded as a Christian nation. And not only can you now tell your Christian friends that that's not true, you can explain why it's not true by giving them this book or learning some of the content in it. So hopefully that helps you. A quick reminder, we are still doing a fundraiser for Black non-believers. And they are having a conference called Women of Color Beyond Belief, October 4th through the 6th, right here in Chicago, the area I'm in. I mean, at least it's close enough I can drive to it. I'm way out in the suburbs, in the boonies. But this conference, October 4th through the 6th of 2019, everyone is welcome. Everyone is encouraged to go. If you have complained about the fact that there's no conferences ever in Chicago, this is your solution. Right here, right now, months in advance. What is that, like 5 months, 4.5 months, in advance? So you can go to Black Nonbelievers and sign up. If you go to the website, blacknonbelievers.com/Phil, it's a very special link where they're going to track all sales and contributions made through this link. And I'm going to match whatever you guys give, buy, whatever, up to $5,000 because I want to help this conference out. I want to make sure it's a big success. So once again, blacknonbelievers.com/Phil. You can sign up for the convention for as little as $105. If you want the ball and the gala and the reception and the dinner and all that stuff, it's $175. You can buy those things separately, but they're a little more expensive. So I think the best deal is the full registration, $175. If you don't want to go to the conference, you can't make it to the conference, you've got other plans, that same website, you can go and just donate some money. So if you donate some money there, that counts towards all the fundraising that I'm doing. And once it gets to 5,000, I'm going to match it. Matter of fact, whatever you guys buy and donate, I'm going to match up to 5,000. So I don't care how the money gets there, just it's got to show up. So do that. Got a lot of things coming up. I think the next show I'm going to do a special. I don't think I've ever done this over the years. One of my most memorable talks was called Breaking the Cycle, how to get children out of religion. And of course, it's on YouTube. But the very next episode, I am going to put that up as kind of a best of the Phil Ferguson show, even though I think it's never been on the show. And I think it'll translate it. There's actually a video on YouTube. You can just Google Phil Ferguson Breaking the Cycle. It was from Skepticon many years ago now, but I think it still holds mostly true, and I think you'll find it enjoying and entertaining. And it will be a no-charge show podcast to patrons. So don't worry, you're not paying for a rebroadcast of something I did. It's just to fill the gap while I am away for a couple of weeks. And then when I come back, we'll do a regular old-fashioned show. So best of show next week, patreon.com/Phil. If you'd like to donate to the show, blacknonbelievers.com/Phil. If you'd like to go to their conference or just donate money. And I hope to see you out there somewhere on the road. Until then, ciao.